All right, everyone, welcome back, and we'll start with our tutorial for week 3. This is the first half, which we'll be recording in Toowoomba. Now, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page, if you go to your study desk, you'll find that I've given you the textbook slides and the tutorial questions feedback, which means that the tutorial questions you find in your textbook are already given to you with their answers. Okay? So again, there's nothing, you can move up as fast as you want. You can move ahead of us. Everything is provided to you. Now, what we're going to do today is to touch upon some of these questions. So I'm not going to cover every question in the textbook. That's not my intention. However, I need to make sure that when you look at these questions and look at the answers, you know basically what you're looking for. Okay? All right. I'll explain further as we go through the questions. We will follow the Wentworth-Miller method. So this is going to lead us to identifying the legal issues. And this is simply your planning strategy in order for you to get the legal issues, and then you have to apply the ILAC. In your exam, because this really is related to your exam, I've already talked about the assignment. This is in relation to part B of your exam. You don't need to write this up, although you can put it as a plan so the marker can see it. What I need is the ILAC. At the top of each page, you will have the legal issue, and then you leave space and write the law. And then, of course, the law is going to be very easy this time around because it's an open book, as long as you have your own notes. Then you have the application of that law to this scenario, and finally 1 or 2 sentences for the conclusion. And you repeat that for every issue that you might think exists in this scenario. Okay, so we're going to start applying the Wentworth method with the parties, identify the parties, then the premises, then the elements, and finally the issues. We're going to go back a little bit to chapter 4 on page 113. So this is question 7 of your textbook, and it says, consider the following section from an act, and then answer the questions that follow. So the act has this sentence, this section says, it shall be an offense for a person to sell an offensive weapon, including a rifle, shotgun, or revolver, in a public place. And then we're given a number of scenarios, many problem-solving questions, and we are asked which one of these would be caught by this act. I mean, is there an offense under each one of these scenarios? All right. Now remember, last week, especially in Springfield, we talked about canons of interpretation. And we looked in particular about 2 maxims of legal interpretation from common law. The first one was known as noscitur associi, or was known as the as the context rule, and the other one was a jus dum generis, or a jus dum generis, a jus dum generis, or a jus dum generis, which is your class rule. Okay? But that's not what I want to focus on here. My focus here is on this idea of elements. Okay? The first thing I want you to do, if you want to analyze this, so think of algebra, for example. Law is very different from mathematics, but if you are going to solve a mathematical equation, you're always going to have to arrange the equation so that you have the same terms together, right? Powers to 2 have to be put together, powers to 1, and then your numbers, and then equal to 0. Okay, something like that. This is exactly what we are doing to solve this question. You have to arrange what you see in front of you in a way that can help you answer the question. And that way is arranging what you have in terms of elements. Every legal theory, whether it's negligence or in contracts or the crimes, has elements. Every section, every offense has elements. Okay? So we want to go through this and ask ourselves, what are the elements of this offense? Remember, we said elements are the things that you have to prove So this is, for example, let's say criminal law. Okay? So it has to be that these elements will have to be proved beyond reasonable doubt, each and every one of them. And if you fail on any of these elements, you cannot make the offense. Can someone help me, please, with elementizing this section? What are the elements of this offense? So, what do I have to prove in order to find someone in breach or that is caught by this offense? Yes? Okay. So remember when we talked about, correct? Remember when we talked about our definition of law? We said that we are trying to, what? Regulate behavior, conduct. And we said you regulate that through verbs. The first thing you want to look at is what is happening here in terms of behavior. The behavior is in terms of selling something. In order for someone to be caught by this offense, you have first to prove that they were selling something. We talked about something earlier in relation to a flick knife displayed in a window, and we said whether that would be sale or not. So you have to make sure that the first thing you have to prove is that there's a selling. That's the first element. What is the second element? All right, so it has to be selling, number one, but you have to be selling an offensive weapon. Okay, so then there is explanation of what is an offensive weapon, including a rifle, shotgun, or revolver. Are we done? Or is there more elements? In a public place. Yes? So there are three things you have to prove. The selling of an offensive weapon in a public place. All right. So you have to first put these elements. And what are we going to do now? Now that we found the elements, what do we search for now? What are we trying to identify? Sorry? The facts. And the facts with the elements, when you superimpose the facts on the elements, you come up with, what do you come up with? The first thing you're going to use in ILAC. The issues. All of this so that you can identify the issues, i.e., based on the facts, which one of these elements is causing you problems? I.e., can you prove it or not? So, let's superimpose our facts. Let's look at the first one. It says, there's person A, sold his flick knife to B while they were looking at magazines in a news agency. Who can analyze that for us? A, what did he do? Sold his flick knife to B while they were looking at magazines in a news agency. What's the first element?
Well, yeah, he did sell the flick knife.
Okay. So, is there an issue on the first element?
Yes.
No. Why not? What does the fact tell you? He sold. Any more explanation do you need to understand that there was a selling? He sold. So where is the issue? I can very easily make this first element. I have no problem with this element. There is no issue here. There's no problem for me because I said he sold. Do you understand? We are going through the facts and looking at the elements to identify which issues arise. You have to spot the issues. When I say I sold something, then there is nothing wrong here. To sell, he sold. A sold what to B? Flick knife. What is the second element? Offensive weapon. So the question becomes whether a flick knife is an offensive weapon. Is that an issue for you? No. It could be. Okay. So we have to go through whether a flick knife is an offensive weapon. Do you think that would be a problem? Do you think that's really a strong issue here? Or is it easy for us to argue? So you argue on the facts. Is it easy for us to argue that a flick knife is an offensive weapon? Yeah? Okay. But we can differ. Some reasonable people would say, actually, we can make innovative arguments to say that a flick knife is not an offensive weapon. What kind of argument are you going to make to tell me that a flick knife is not an offensive weapon? Okay? So, use. Use. Can you think of different uses for a flick knife compared to what? Compared to what?
Safety knife?
Yeah, a safety knife, but also what we are talking about as a rifle. They're saying to you, they're giving you examples in the offense. They're saying, so go back to those canons that we talked about. Okay, Noscitur use of generis. It says offensive weapon, including examples, a rifle, shotgun, or revolver. Do you think that these things like a rifle, a shotgun, or a revolver are in the same class as a flick knife?
Not really. A gun is a much more dangerous weapon. It's a firearm.
Well, a gun has one purpose to kill.
Gun has one purpose, to kill people. What is the problem for you based on this language?
It's not really stated if knives are included as an offensive weapon.
Yes? But when we talked about rifle, shotgun, or revolver, what did we say? We said including.
Yep.
Is that a problem for us?
Yes, because it means it's only including those certain weapons.
So we're looking at an open set. It's not only rifles, guns, shotguns, and revolvers. It's including, which means that you have a wider set that could include this flick knife. All right. What about the last one? In a public place. Where did this transaction of buying and selling occur?
News agents.
A news agency. Is a news agency a public place? Is there, yes? It's still private property. Someone says it's still a private property. What is the definition of a public place?
Where the public can go freely.
Okay. Where a public can go freely. You could argue that there's a legal issue here. You could argue that this is a private property, not a public place. Okay? But always remember, there's one problem here that you have to focus on. So I wouldn't mind if you find that there are legal issues in everywhere. But a reasonable person would tell you the first element is made. Don't waste time writing in the exam or standing in front of someone arguing that that is a problem. They would shut you up, actually. They would just say, move on. We know that there was a selling. All right. Let's look at another one. B. It says, C, another person, gave D his air gun when C visited his home. So we go always through the elements. The first element is to sell. Superimpose these facts. Was there a selling?
No.
Why?
Because it was more of a giveaway, not a sell.
Is that a legal issue? Yes? Because it's a problem. I have to sit and think, so I'm trying to make this guy go under the offense. I'm going to stick the offense to them. How am I going to do that? I have to sit down and think, how am I going to exchange it from a gift? From a gift to something that is sold. So it's an issue for me. What about the next one? Offensive weapon. Is that an issue here? An air gun.
Well, an air gun's only like a BB gun, isn't it?
So what do you want to argue? Who wants to argue that this is an offensive weapon? Okay? Who wants to argue that it's not an offensive weapon? So remember, in law, stop thinking about right and wrong. It's always an infinite continuum of shades of gray. It's up to you whether you move it to the right or you move it to the wrong. You move it to the black or move it to the white. Never ever again are you going to be satisfied with an answer of yes or no. It always depends.
A rifle, you have to, in Australian law, you have to have a firearms license to own a rifle. That makes it an offensive.
Okay. So he's talking about the analogy in relation to what you need to have in order for you to own this air gun. In a public place, is that an issue for you?
Yes. Yes, because this is private property. They're in another.
Yes, because here we talk about a home. We're talking about giving him the air gun when C visited at home, visited his home. So you can start seeing now, this is second one. Most likely you find a problem with to sell. So you have to argue that this was a selling, and then you have a problem in public place. What are you going to say to convince that this is something that was in the nature of selling, or that it was in a public place? What can you argue to say that it was a selling? It says he gave him this air gun when he visited his home. What can you say? We don't know. I gave you my pen when you came and visited my home. But then what?
Did it say,
What is missing? Yes.
well, it didn't say, was it just a borrowing? Did he sign over ownership of the firearm?
Or I gave him this air gun as a gift. Did I say that? No. Did you assume that I said that? Yes, you did. So that's when you go and argue that. So you'd argue, actually there was a sale, or maybe. Why? Because we were not told that the giving was in the nature of a gift. I might have given them something, but for consideration. So we'll talk about consideration. For something in return, there's a price. It's not for free. Okay, let's look at the third one. E auctioned F's grandfather's First World War rifle to G. What happens now? You see, every time you come with this, you take the facts, but that's not enough. So when you go to the final exam, you only have the answer. So you'd have your notes. I hope so. You'll have your notes, and you have the substantive areas there, and you have the elements. But you are waiting for one more thing, which is the facts. And that's when you start finding out what the issues are. Okay, so here there was an auction. The first element says you have to sell. Is auction in the nature of selling?
Yeah.
Why?
Because you're making sort of a bid, and whoever bids the most, that's the auction. You're giving it to whoever's giving you the highest amount of money.
And you can research this more, and you can refine this argument by referring to the Sale of Goods Acts and saying that those sale of goods acts require money, require an exchange of money. Is that what we do in an auction? So it doesn't matter how we did that. So if there's a third party, someone facilitating, what matters is that at the end there was a transfer of money. Okay. An offensive weapon. Is this a problem? Is this an issue now? What was being sold? World War I. Grandfathers. His grandfathers, does that matter? His grandfather's First World War rifle.
Yes, that is
If I take grandfather out, does it become an offensive weapon?
probably,
If I take World War I out. He auctioned a rifle. Is that an offensive weapon?
Yes.
Absolutely. No issue there. Let me throw in this World War I. What happens now? It's still an offensive weapon. You can still use it. You can still use it. What if it's a grandfather's World War I weapon? Is it an offensive weapon? Okay. Can you? Yeah?
Well, maybe there's a bit of a grey area there because maybe the gun doesn't work anymore.
Okay.
It doesn't.
Just be the devil. Just find the devil in the details. Maybe it doesn't work anymore. It's World War I. Oh, it's my grandfather's. Do you know what I'm keeping it? Because it's not because it works or doesn't work. It has a sentimental value to me.
But legally, to not be a firearm, not working means it has to be welded to such an extent that it cannot be restored ever again.
So that's the legal definition. Answer to that question. Answer to that argument. You might say that it has to be legally not offensive, i.e. it has to be disabled in a way. That's what I want to see. I'm not telling you there's a right or wrong answer. I'm asking you to think about how I can move it to that side. How can I move it to this side? What about the last thing? It's an auction of this grandfather's first World War rifle. And is it in a public place?
It's not specified.
Okay. So can you infer something from the facts? No? Yes? Someone says what?
Auction will be in public place.
Do you think that an auction is going to be in a private house?
It could be.
It could be.
It could be online.
Is that what we call abductive? It could be online, but is that not public place?
Yeah.
Why would you? What is the purpose of holding an auction? You're trying to sell this item.
To the public.
And when you want to sell this item, do you think that usually, actually, that's a good point. Sometimes you could have private auctions. In the sense that not everyone can go and bid. But that's not necessarily because it's a private in the sense that it's not a public place, but you have to have certain qualifications in terms of resources to be able actually to bid on this. So that's the kind of arguments you want to have there. All right. So I thought the most difficult part here, the real issue, was whether there was, which one is this?
This number 4.
Yeah. So it was in relation to whether it was an offensive weapon or not. I thought the other two could be easily overcome given the facts. That doesn't mean this is the only answer. And it doesn't mean that that's the only right answer. And it doesn't mean that if you get all of this in a different way, you still get an HD. Because what matters in law is not the final answer. What matters is why. Why? Convince me. All right. Let's look at the last one. H. Now a child who lived on a farm swapped his 22 millimeter rifle with I, a person, at the market for a Remington so that he could shoot wild pigs. Okay. Again, selling. Was there a selling here?
Yes.
Okay. So why do you think there was a selling here?
He said he gave it to me at the market, didn't he?
He swapped. Okay.
Swapped, okay, I guess that's what it was.
Is swapping a form of selling? Yes. Many people say yes. Anyone wants to say otherwise? No. It's not selling.
Well, I don't know what it would come down to what the government's definition
Okay.
of that is, but
Okay.
if selling requires money, then you could argue it's not.
Okay. So we don't know. And you can do the research. You can go online. You can check. So this is the idea of learning law. I would never be able to teach you each and every offense, each and every act, or each and every precedent, right? Nor can I actually open each and every substantive area of law. But what I'm trying to hope to achieve here is that when you go, for example, to learn about taxation, or if some of you are going to go and learn about construction law, you can do that in this structured manner. All right? So the last one basically The biggest problem for you would be really this idea of whether you need money under Section 4, subsection 1 of the Sale of Goods Act of 1896 in Queensland in order for the swap to qualify under this act as an offense, i.e. under as a selling. Okay, that's enough. Let's move on to chapter 29. So we're going to start with question 9. And this says a real estate agent and a pastor, very interesting combination, of a church with a large number of Pacific Islanders in the congregation approached new Pacific Islanders to join his congregation on their arrival to Australia. What a good man. He subsequently sold them homes well above market value, like Enron, that he had bought cheaply through companies he controlled. The bank funding the purchases was unaware of the arrangements, or they could have been just like with Enron, and approved amounts for less than the full purchase price. The pastor then took out second mortgages over the properties in favor of his companies, so he is making assets. These mortgages are assets on your balance sheets over the properties in favor of his companies, with the result that the purchasers owed more than the houses were worth. And then you're asked, do the actions of the pastor amount to unconscionable conduct? Now, as usual, you'd identify the parties, so you'd know who's going to take whom to court. Most likely it's the congregation, these new Pacific Islanders. They're going to try to move against this pastor. And what do they want? So, most likely compensation, because they paid more than they should have. And the pastor would try to deny any liability. And what's the premise they're going to use? In the exam, I'm not going to tell you what the premise is. So you have to figure out what the premise on your own. Here you are given the premise. The premise is called unconscionable conduct. We'll look more closely at unconscionable conduct when we talk about contracts. What area of substantive law is this? Is this criminal law? Civil? Is this torts? Civil wrongs? What instrument did the pastor use to create the scheme?
Well, I guess he used exploitation because he was
Yeah,
able
yeah.
to get the houses.
But how did he do it? What legal instrument? What? He subsequently what? Sold. How do we buy and sell? Anything. If you go on a bus, if you go to a movie theater, if you go anywhere, you buy and sell through what? Money. But you have what legal instrument you need to have? That's not the legal instrument. What do we call the legal instrument that allows us to buy and sell? When you go to the cafe, you give them the money. They give you the coffee. What have you created between yourself and the cafe? A contract. Thank you. A contract. This is contract law. Always remember that. When there's selling, you're talking about contracts. Part of this contracts area is what we call unconscionable contracts or unconscionable conduct. So parties, congregation, real estate, pastor, objective, compensation, no liability. The premise is what we talk about as unconscionable conduct. Okay? And unconscionable conduct is elementized for us on pages 816 and 321. So let's first go to this page 321. And we'll have a nice summary of what you need to prove in order for you to, what you need to prove for unconscionable conduct. Here we go. In brief, it says what has to be established. We haven't covered this, right? It doesn't matter. I'm just going through this idea of identifying the premise, and then after you identify the premise, you have to identify the elements. And then you go to the legal issue, right? So first, for a contract to be set aside on the grounds that it was unconscionable, the plaintiff, the congregation, must prove that they were in a position of special disadvantage at the time of the contract. It must have substantially affected their ability to protect themselves. The defendant, the pastor, must have known or should have known. So what we call actual or constructive knowledge of the plaintiff's, the congregation's disability, and had taken advantage of it. And finally, the fourth element, the actions of the defendant, the pastor, were unconscionable, i.e. unfair or unjust. So because we're talking about unfair and unjust, you immediately realize that this theory comes from where? Comes from common law or from equity? Comes from equity. Because common law does not give, you know what, about justice. Justice comes only when we go and talk about equity. So you can use this from equity to argue in any court of law, including those that are common law courts. All right, let's look at how we can now use these elements to look at what the legal issues are. Now, you'll find that this is actually talked about in these cases of Amadio, Keshaw, and Luth, and Pirose. I don't even know how to pronounce these names. It doesn't matter. What matters is that we'll cover these in some more detail when we look at contracts, not today, okay? Let's just today say that we were given these elements. So it's much easier, and these are the elements we want to look at, okay? Now, what do you need to do? So you have the scenario. So this comes from your notes. You have this in your notes. What comes next now? You need to do what? At the top of every page, you're going to put issue 1. What's the first issue for you? P in a position of special disadvantage. Is that an issue? What fact are you going to use to argue that the congregation was in a position of special disadvantage? So, someone says, they just recently moved there. Does it matter that they are Pacific Islanders? If I change the scenario and say new Kiwis arriving in Australia, what turns? It's okay. Say it. I know that there's this issue about Pacific Islanders and you're too sensitive to say something.
Well, there's more disadvantage to Pacific Islanders because they're less familiar with our systems of sales.
I think that's a reasonable argument. I'm not saying you're right or wrong. I'm just saying it makes sense. So, to show that there was special disadvantage, you can talk about that they are Pacific Islanders, and so what? And then you talk about that they are not only Pacific Islanders, but they are new to Australia. Or you can combine them together and just talk about that. That's the origin, right, of this idea of special disadvantage. So what does that boil down to? You're saying that these new Pacific Islanders might not have been financially literate, in the sense that they will understand what a mortgage is or know a fair value for a house in Australia, because that's what happened to them. They were sold the houses at a higher price than they should have. The second one, was that disability financial? You give it a name, financial illiteracy. Was that disability substantially affected the congregation's ability to protect themselves? What are you going to use to argue the second element, if it's an issue? So in the exam, you can simply say that the second element does not present, or you can say the first element does not present any issue because we know that these are new Pacific Islanders, so we know that they will have the special disadvantage of financial illiteracy. One sentence, two sentences, and you're done. Move on to the important ones. What about disability? Did it affect their ability to protect themselves? I.e., so what are they going to say? Yes, why?
The same reason I would say.
So, because of this financial illiteracy, they were not able to understand what a fair market value would be.
Or how
Which meant what? That they ended up paying more than they should have.
and also the fact that the person selling them the house was supposed to be trustworthy.
Okay, so we come to the third one. Now we say the pastor must have known or should have known of this congregation's financial illiteracy. You see what's happening? This is abstract. I keep throwing at it the facts. So I move away from the abstraction more towards the facts. So did the pastor know or should have known that the congregation's financial illiteracy had, did he know about that or should have known and has taken advantage of it? Let's start with the first part. Did he know? Most likely than not. Why?
Because he knows that they were foreigners from different countries. You probably don't understand our selling customs.
Plus, he already
Where does the pastor come from? Does that matter?
the fact that he was pastor of that church would indicate that he knows enough about that area.
Is he a Pacific Islander?
It doesn't matter if he is or not.
Okay. Is he from England?
Doesn't say.
Does it matter?
No.
Is that something you can use to say he knew of this financial illiteracy or that he should have known of this financial illiteracy? Yes? So someone wants to use a different piece of information. There's a large number of Pacific Islanders in this congregation. What does that tell you? What can you infer out of that? He is, as Tim said, he is familiar with Pacific Islanders, with their culture, and, yeah, with their disabilities. Did he take advantage of this disability? Straightforward. So you don't sit down there and write a page trying to convince me that he took a disadvantage. I'll give you that. All right. Last one. Anything causing you any particular issues trying to prove on the facts? The first issue, the first element, the second element, the third element, most likely than not, they are very easy to prove. There are no issues there. Okay. These actions were unfair. So the pastor's actions, namely selling these homes to these new Pacific Islanders at a higher price than the fair market value, were unfair. Do you know what to take that from? You see where the jugular is? What kind of argument you're going to throw at that? Yeah? No? Leave it for you to look at? Maybe? Okay. Quickly. Let's go. Okay, so this is what you just basically have to go through. Of course, you will end up writing sometimes a bit more. So in an exam scenario, because it's an open book now, I expect you to make reference to Amadio and maybe just say a sentence about what Amadio says. Okay, the ratio, for example. Okay. There's also at the end a reference to the ACL, which is the Australian Consumer Law, and we'll talk more about that when we talk about contracts. But remember always that this analysis has to go through both common law, okay, like unconscionable conduct, but also the legislative intervention in terms of the ACL. We'll talk about that some more detail later on at the end of this course when we talk about contracts. Let's look at this simulation quickly. James Farrell. Let's look at this one.
James Farrell Limited, JF, is a large national group of companies that sells food products manufactured exclusively in Australia. It has a policy of social responsibility and environmental sustainability. JF has recently taken over Mitchell's Food Limited, Mitchell's, a medium-large public limited liability company. You are an executive officer of JF, appointed to the board of Mitchell's to manage the takeover process and ensure that Mitchell's practices and policies comply with those of JF. Initial investigations reveal a number of matters of concern. The CEO has asked you to investigate these issues further and to come up with the best strategies to move forward, whilst keeping in mind the social responsibility and environmental sustainability policies of JF. Click Next to begin your challenge.
Okay.
Good luck.
So, this is like a merger between two companies. You are an executive in the company that sees itself as socially responsible and has environmental friendly policies. You bought this other business, and let's see what happens next.
One of Mitchell's most popular products, an iconic Australian name and one of the reasons JF acquired Mitchell's, is manufactured at the Westgate plant, which uses waste disposal methods which, though legal, do not comply with JF's high standards. This was not discovered at the time of the takeover negotiations because the plant, which had belonged to Mitchell's, was sold 6 months earlier to a private company owned by the family of Mitchell's CEO. The plant is in separate ownership to Mitchell's, even though the two companies share the same CEO. Mitchell's used the separate legal entity principle to claim that they complied with JF's high environmental standards without having to clean up the plant. The purchase was funded by a loan that was guaranteed by Mitchell's on a vote of the CFO and a non-executive director. The CEO disclosed his interest and did not vote on the decision. The contract for supply of the product runs for 5 years with 2 options for renewal. Click Next to continue.
So far so good? So the idea is that there was some conflict of interest here. Some people did the right thing and they recused themselves. They said, we're not going to vote on this takeover transaction. All right.
Currently, the Westgate plant is just breaking even and can barely service its loan. If it can't make payments, Mitchell's would be called on as guarantor to pay the arrears. The supply contract with JF is the plant's sole asset. The Westgate plant is the only remaining large employer in a small town, and the community relies on it. Click Next to continue.
Okay, so the plant is not doing well. It's hardly breaking even. Okay?
You meet with members of the Mitchell's board to better understand the issues relating to the Westgate plant and their decision to sell it. Christine, the CFO, says,
The sale makes financial sense. There's no illegality here.
Randolph, the CEO, says,
The way I see it, we've done you a favour. Your reputation is protected. JF has no legal relationship with the company that runs the plant, but my position on both boards means we can maintain a mutually beneficial business relationship.
Alan, the non-executive director, says, I don't know much about business ethics. If the process is legal, what's the problem? Click Next to continue. You examine your options for resolving this issue. Which recommendation will you take to Sarah, the CEO of JF? Select an option from the choices on the right.
So, the options. First, JF must insist that the Westgate plant be cleaned up. Or, option 2, JF must cancel the supply contract with the Westgate plant. Or, option 3, JF can do nothing and rely on the separate legal entity principle, a legal principle, to deny responsibility for conditions at the Westgate plant. So we said that there's something called the separate legal entity principle, which means I can create a subsidiary of my organization and say then that whomever is not happy with the actions of that subsidiary will have to go and talk to them. I'm not responsible. This is the case here when you see that JF is a separate legal entity from Westgate. So, as an executive, you are business students, what do you think should be the option to use? Which option would you take? Clean up the plant? What's the problem here? That's super duper, right? That's the best option in the world. What's the problem? As always, economics. There's a cost involved. And to be real people, and when you graduate, you know that the first thing you have to justify is whether the benefit from this expenditure is going to be greater than the cost involved. Next one, it says that you just get out. Cancel the supply contract. What's the problem with that?
Find another supplier.
Yeah, who is going to find another supplier? You. So JF again has a cost involved, meaning they have to have switching costs. Anything else that's a problem with this option?
You might not be able to just get out of the contract.
Maybe the contract stipulates that you cannot actually cancel. What else? From a social responsibility perspective, what did we know about this plant? Yes?
Plant shut down, not people lose jobs.
Okay, so probably that's the most important point here, that if you pull out, this plant is going to shut down. This is the biggest contract that they have, which means what? All these local people are going to lose their jobs. So what was the problem again? The problem was that this plant was what? Creating pollution. But that's so serious that I'm going to starve you to death. Right? So that's the kind of ethical situation you have to look at. What about the third option? You can do nothing, which is probably the best thing because you don't have to spend any money. And just rely on the separate legal entity principle. So either you spend too much money, or you spend some money, or you don't spend any money at all. This is what you see. Or you can do the best socially responsible thing and clean up the plant, so you give it long-term prosperity, long-term prospects. Or you can simply cancel the supply contract and make all of these people unemployed. Or you simply just do nothing and let them pollute, so the next generation really is going to suffer, but this generation will still have its jobs. Which one do you want to select? Okay, let's go with the highest one, the most expensive one. We are ethical people.
You take your recommendation up to Sarah, the CEO of JF. You tell her that the terms of the license agreement give Mitchells the power to insist that the plant be cleaned up, and that this is the only option if they are to conform to JF's environmental sustainability policies. Sarah agrees that the plant is a problem. However, she is concerned about the burden the cost of clean-up might place on the Westgate plant. She also has to consider JF's duty to shareholders and the detrimental effect these costs would have on the return that JF was expecting from its investment in Mitchells. Click Next to continue. After your discussion with the CEO, what do you decide to do? Select an option from the choices on the right.
So, this is the pressure. You chose to be ethically responsible. But the CEO sees a problem because of the cost involved. So, there's a nudge. What are you going to do now? So, either continue with your original plan and insist that the plant is cleaned up, or take the matter back to Mitchell's board and see how they are prepared to address the situation. So it's not my problem. Well, how about I externalize it? Let me not be the decision maker. You make the decision. Or consider an alternative way to deal with the problem. What do you want to use? Which one? You want to go for an alternative? I'm not going to shy away from that. This ethics should take priority over profits. And I'm not going to give it to someone else, so that's not my problem. I will have to go back and think of something else.
You initially decided that cleaning up the plant was the best choice. However, after discussing the implications with Sarah, your CEO, you feel that this plan would have a detrimental effect on the company. You decide to cancel the contract with the plant. What would be the most significant outcome of this solution? Select an option from the choices on the right.
So limited options. You have to cancel. So either the Westgate plant would go out of business, or the closure of the Westgate plant would devastate the community, or you'd spare the Westgate plant the cost of having to clean up its environmental practices. Which one do you think you want to go? Which one you're gonna use? Which one gonna choose? Okay, you would spare them the cost. Okay, it's the cost, isn't it? Who's gonna pay?
You cancel JF's supply contract with the plant without a plan in place for its replacement, and it goes out of business, creating widespread unemployment in the small town where it was located. In addition to the harm done to the plant's employees, JF has difficulty finding a new supplier to manufacture a quality product governed by strong environmental standards. Both JF's reputation and profits suffer, and your CEO is displeased with you. Click Next to continue. Now that you have resolved the...
Yes.
At the two choices back where I said alternative, I must have misunderstood that because I thought I read that
Something different from what you had before.
Alternative of what we could do with the plant.
Okay, let's follow through with this line of thinking. What else could you have done other than just cancel the contract? What could you have done?
Well, it would have a higher initial cost, but you could look at options of how you could make it profitable.
Like what?
Like more other products that you can produce there, and you could sell to other companies even. So you could turn it into a profitable thing that would employ even more staff.
All right. We were told that this was an iconic, always play with the facts, iconic Australian brand. What does that tell you? Iconic Australian brand. I need cost to make it even more environmental friendly, that it even becomes more iconic Australian brand. Where do I go for that help, that kind of help? Who might help me with that? I have this vision. The government externalize not the decision making. You're an executive, right? You externalize the cost. And you try to go and lobby the government by saying, look, we have this iconic brand. The whole town relies on this brand, and we have this problem with cost. They might decide that we will subsidize part of the cost. Or they might decide to have someone who can help you resolve this environmental problem, maybe give you equipment or, with reduced interest, or spread the cost. Anything else, So sometimes you have to actually think outside the box that's given to you in the simulation. Let's switch gear and go to another problem. So just forget about that problem for now. You resolve that issue, all right?
You speak to the CEO and CFO of Mitchells to get a better idea of the terms of the arrangement.
How do you go
Christine, the
back?
CFO, says,
This has been
I want to go back. So, okay, so the idea is that they were trying to have some sort of a sponsorship to a musical brand, a musical band, and they wanted to put their name so that it's some sort of an advertisement for them. Okay, so I support this musical band with things like customs and so on, but you have to display my brand. Okay.
next, you meet with the musicians. They tell you that they are happy with the arrangement. Next, you meet with the musicians. They tell you that they are happy with the arrangement. The singer, Cecilia, says,
"This group is so important to all of us, and after we pay the cost of travel expenses, we would not be able to afford uniforms or instruments without Mitchell's help."
Click Next to continue.
Okay, let's just continue.
After reviewing the situation, you must now make a decision as to whether this sponsorship is true to JF's ethical and social responsibility principles. What do you decide? Select an option from the choices on the right.
So this is what they call ambush marketing. Ambush marketing in the sense that you put your name there, okay, but you don't pay as much as the people who sponsor, for example, the venues or the events or the gigs where that band plays. And you have these three options. Either you say it's clear ambush marketing, so unethical, and we're going to terminate the agreement with this band. Or this is clearly one of ambush marketing, but JF could find a way to modify the agreement and still support the band. Or you say this case does not qualify as ambush marketing, so we should continue with the agreement as is. So it's a reverse from previous slides. The lowest option has no cost to you. Status quo, keep going. Or you have to modify the agreement, so there's some cost, or the largest cost probably because of the switching transaction. You need to find something else. Which one do you want to choose, you think?
Well, we first need to find out what advantages this sponsorship has to our company.
Okay, so someone says we have to look at the cost-benefit analysis. Yes? And we have to see what benefit this kind of agreement would bring to JF.
Because if it's beneficial enough, then it's worth spending extra money.
All right. But what about the ethical considerations here? Do we start our analysis of ethical considerations by looking at cost-benefit analysis? Or is that something separate that you have to look at in a different framework? Can you quantify the ethical benefit that comes to the musicians versus the ethical cost of the ambush marketing, assuming that this is ambush marketing?
That would probably be determined by the board, but I personally would think that this, it would have to be determined by the board.
Who's going to decide whether this is ambush marketing or not? Isn't that the ethical issue? Or not? Who's going to decide ambush marketing? You? Someone inside The company? Someone inside JF? Or someone outside JF?
Our legal team.
Or the legal team? Just like the entrepreneur that goes to his professional teams of lawyers and accountants, and they look you in the eye and they say, of course it's not ambush marketing, because that's what you want to hear. Just like in Enron. Okay? Choose one. Let's see. Which one do you want to choose? You want to think it is actually ambush marketing, or no, it's just not ambush marketing, let's just go on as usual?
I would have personally gone with option 2, which is
Okay, it is ambush marketing, and we should modify the agreement. Okay, let's see. Agreement modified.
In order to avoid the accusation of ambush marketing, you modify the agreement so that the Mitchells logo is not displayed with the group of musicians and provide them with new uniforms without the Mitchells name. In addition, you provide additional support from JF to pay for their travel expenses and accommodations. JF gets a glowing article called True Social Responsibility in a major magazine, and your CEO is very pleased with you. Click Next to continue. You now turn to the final problem that has been assigned to you. It has been brought to your attention that while Mitchell's labels always say that only Australian ingredients are used in their food products, the company sometimes uses imported ingredients when local produce is too expensive or unavailable. You take immediate steps to ensure that only Australian ingredients will be used in Mitchell's products from now on, but are unable to determine from Mitchell's records whether there are any imported ingredients in products that have already been sent out to retailers. After reviewing the situation, you must now determine how to proceed. How serious is the problem? Select an option from the choices on the right.
So either these labels are a breach of your ethical policy, and you must address the situation, or that these labels, misleading labels, are not only a breach of ethical policy, but also a violation of the law, in particular the ACL. So you need to address it not because it's ethical, because it's illegal. Or it's not that terrible to have a few ingredients that are imported. You can ignore this issue. Again, the bottom one is zero cost to you. The top one is probably some cost, and most of the cost, of course, would come if you are in violation of the law. Which one do you think you should decide? 2. So you want to go saying, actually, there's suspicion we have a problem with the law.
You now understand the seriousness of the problem. What should you do to resolve it? Select an option from the choices on the right.
This is now not just an ethical problem, it's a legal problem. That's what you think. So either issue a recall of all the products, or there's no need to issue a recall since you don't know for sure whether or not the products contain imported ingredients. Or try to offload the products cheaply to a supermarket chain to sell under their own generic brand, preferably somewhere in some of the Pacific Islands, as they have done. Which one are you going to choose? As the executive, what do you think you should do? That's the easiest thing, right? Because it is the safest thing. But can you remember what we said earlier? It's the cost. And you have also bosses, you have superiors, and they're looking at you. Okay? All right, let's say that you wanted to do this, so you went ahead and issued the recall.
You tell the CEO that a full product recall is the only alternative. Sarah agrees, but she is worried that it would be hugely expensive and harmful to JF's reputation, especially as it may be that the products contain no imported ingredients, in which case there has been no misrepresentation to consumers. Click Next to continue. After your discussion with Sarah, you decide that the best way forward is to
So again, the same pressure.
select an option from the choices on the right.
Same pressure as before. You want to do the right thing, but the right thing means you have to spend a lot of money. and you don't even know whether there's a problem or not. So just like Volkswagen, if you recall, in recent times. So you go back and think, should I issue still the product recall, or offload this product cheaply to a supermarket chain, or risk doing nothing to avoid the cost of a recall?
Not enough information, or not enough facts to make
If something happens, and we find out, in fact, that there was this problem, and it's caught, and the ACL becomes relevant. So you have made an offense under the ACL. Some of these are criminal offenses. What's going to happen to you? You think Sarah's going to take the blame for it, or you? As opposed to what? If I go with the recall and we find out there was nothing wrong, what's going to happen to you? Do you think that they're going to fire you for this? And if they do you have any recourse? What can you go and do? There's something called unjustified dismissal, and you can still claim benefit and claim your rights out of that. Most likely than not, you stick to your guns and you continue on the same path.
You issue a product recall. Unfortunately, this does cause some problems for JF. The public assumes that the recalled products are dangerous and sales of JF's products drop. An extensive public relations campaign is necessary to resolve the issue. However, Sarah agrees that JF has done the right thing and she is pleased with you, in spite of the costs. Click Next.
Okay, so we're done. As you see at the bottom here, you'll find View Results Report, and you're given a percentage usually. We got 80%, okay? And you can go through this and see why it's 80%. It means that we haven't actually chosen the best options along the way, and why, okay? Now, I'll try to finish off soon now. I wanted to do one more exercise. No, that's it. So I will continue with the other exercises in Springfield, and I'll see you next Monday. Thank you.